They thought I'd stay, that I'd swallow the insult, like I always had. But this time, I stood up, and the entire office felt the shift. A quiet rebellion in heels. The moment Brandon walked in wearing that wrinkled linen shirt and a smirk he hadn't earned, I knew something was off. It wasn't just the way he dropped his laptop bag on the desk next to mine, like claiming territory. It was how he looked around the department with that smug, I'm here now gaze, scanning faces like they were peasants, and he'd just inherited the land. No hello, no handshake, just entitlement. And I just watched, sipping my black coffee slowly, knowing deep down this wasn't a regular Monday. 2 hours later, in a cramped glass box labeled Small Conference 3A, I got the answer. Will you train Brandon? Those 4 words from Martin, my director, self-declared visionary leader, landed with the elegance of a paperweight smashing glass. His tone was light, too light, like it wasn't a request, but a done deal. I stared at him. Train him to do what? My job? Martin blinked once, twice. Well, we're transitioning you into a more support-focused role while Brandon will take point on client strategy. It's not a demotion, more like a redistribution. There it was. The knife in the back wrapped in a corporate smile. I had built that strategy department from scratch. I had onboarded every key client. Late nights, last-minute pivots, crisis calls on Sundays. I had answered them all. Now they wanted me to be Brandon's support? I leaned back, folding my arms. No. Martin chuckled nervously. I think it's best if we stay flexible right now. Brandon's got a fresh MBA and a trust fund. I cut in. That's when his smile tightened. They weren't expecting resistance. I wasn't supposed to say no. They'd counted on my professionalism, my need for stability, my quiet swallowing of injustice. But what they didn't count on was how tired I was of being polite. That night, I read every line of my employment contract like a detective with a flashlight in a dark room. I wanted to know exactly what they could and couldn't do. Could they change my role without consent? Could they restructure me into irrelevance? Turns out, no, they couldn't. Not without triggering a clause that required a formal offer of transfer, which I had every right to refuse. So I wrote an email. Subject line, formal refusal of transfer. Simple. Direct. A thunderclap in Outlook. The next morning, the atmosphere was charged. People weren't looking me in the eye. HR avoided my hallway entirely. Brandon still walked around like he owned the place, but I could see him glance toward my desk, just long enough to sense that I wasn't moving an inch. Martin called again. This time, to offer a smooth exit interview if that's the direction you're choosing. My lips curled slightly. There's no direction yet, but I'll let you know when it's mine. He hated that. But worse, he hated what came next. Payroll blocked my pending bonus the next week. Quietly, of course. No announcement, no justification, just a little missing line on the payslip. They were hoping I wouldn't notice, or that I'd notice but be too exhausted to fight. Wrong. What they didn't know was that I had already spoken to legal. And HR's quiet retaliation? I had the emails, the calendar invites, the messages, everything backed up and time-stamped. I was no longer playing defense, and I had no intention of staying silent. She's not done yet, and neither is the fallout. The only thing colder than the office acai that Thursday morning was the silence around my desk. People avoided me like I was contagious, as if speaking to me would align them with a sinking ship. I wasn't sinking, I was calculating, and every click of my mouse, every shuffle of a folder was deliberate. If they wanted me out, they'd have to do it legally, transparently, and with a paper trail I could pin to every name involved. I opened my inbox. Subject: Exit interview, Friday. 2 p.m. sender. HR no context. No call, no conversation. Just a slot booked and a link to a Zoom room. I chuckled quietly. So that's how it would be? They were staging a graceful push-out. If I didn't show up, I'd be non-cooperative. If I did, I'd validate the narrative that I was already halfway gone. Neat. I declined the invite with a single line. No exit has been agreed upon. No interview will be held. Then I blind copied legal. By lunch, Martin appeared like a weasel in a blazer. He stood beside my desk with the expression of a man pretending everything was just fine. Quick check-in? He asked, gesturing to the small glass box again. I rose, slowly, locking my screen. Once inside, he closed the door too softly. We just want to make this transition as smooth as possible, he began. For everyone. That word again. Transition. They loved passive verbs in corporate. Things didn't happen. They transitioned. No one acted. Things were just decided, as if they weren't the ones pulling strings. I stared at him, expression flat. So the bonus withholding was part of the smooth transition? Martin's nostrils flared, ever so slightly. That's a misunderstanding, a system delay. I slid a printed payroll statement across the table, then explained the block note in the ledger. Someone entered that manually. He didn't respond. His jaw worked silently like he was chewing shame. I've refused the transfer, I continued, as I'm entitled to. Your attempt to frame that as resignation is, in fact, retaliatory and illegal. For a second, just one, his confidence cracked, but it was enough. I left that room not angry, but clear, crystal clear. I wasn't there to negotiate anymore. I was documenting. By Friday morning, a second email from HR landed. Subject: clarification on exit interview timing. Except it wasn't clarification. It was a scramble. The kind you write when you know someone else, someone with authority, might soon be reading it. Too late. My lawyer already was. Then came the real blow. At exactly 11:42 a.m., I received a message from Brandon. Hey, can you send me the historical data on the Belrose account? Martin said you'd loop me in. No greeting, no please, just assumption. I stared at that message for 5 whole minutes, not out of anger, but out of something colder. Calculation. I clicked reply. No, I've declined the role reallocation and am not obligated to share client data. Please direct all questions to management. And then I blind copied HR again. That afternoon, I walked past the glass doors of HR without pausing. Inside, I caught the edge of a conversation. Low voices, tight expressions. They weren't coordinating an exit anymore. They were containing damage. What they didn't know yet was that the damage couldn't be contained, because I wasn't the only one watching, and someone far above Martin's pay grade had just started asking questions. The smirk was gone. But the reckoning hadn't even started. If you've ever been in a room where silence said more than words, drop a comment. You're not alone. The first time I saw the Belrose contract, it was printed on cheap copy paper and handed to me with a shrug. No big deal, Martin had said. Just a mid-tier prospect. 3 months later, it was our biggest account. I'd built it from zero, rewrote their pitch decks, flew out twice to calm their nervous CFO, rewired our internal workflows to meet their shifting KPIs. That deal wasn't a client. It was a monument. Now, Brandon wanted a monument handed to him like a participation trophy, but I wasn't going to be the ceremony. On Monday, I noticed something strange. When I tried to access the Belrose shared folder, my permissions had been revoked. A red banner flashed. Access denied. Contact admin. I blinked, then tried again. Same result. Micro hooks fire off in the brain at moments like that. Questions rush in. Was this petty IT sabotage or the beginning of a larger move? Either way, I took a screenshot, timestamped it, saved it twice. Then I walked, not emailed, down to legal. The office was unusually quiet. No laughter from the dev team, no clacking heels from sales. HR's door was ajar, but the lights inside were dimmed. I knocked on legal's door. Nancy opened it, her smile tight, eyes already reading mine. I assume this isn't social? She asked. No, it's very much procedural. Nancy reviewed the refusal of transfer clause again with me, this time with more edge in her tone. They've boxed themselves in. If they change your role without written consent, it's constructive dismissal. I nodded. And blocking my access to an account I developed? Looks retaliatory, she said, tapping her pen. We'll log it. Then she leaned back. You do know they're hoping you just give up and walk away quietly, right? I smiled. They mistook quiet for weak. That's their first mistake. Back at my desk, Brandon had spun his chair toward me. Hey, he said too casually, I think there's a glitch with the Belrose access. You can just shoot me those files directly. I stared at him like he was speaking a language made entirely of arrogance and audacity. I don't send sensitive client data via chat, I replied flatly, especially not to unauthorized users. He laughed like I was joking. I wasn't. His laugh faded fast. Look, he said, lowering his voice, I know this is awkward, but I didn't ask for this. No, I said quietly. You just accepted it. And I turned back to my screen. By midweek, a memo circulated quietly. Restructuring discussions under review. No names, no departments, but everyone could smell the smoke. Brandon stopped making requests. HR stopped sending invites. Martin stopped making eye contact. And I started packing. Not boxes, receipts, screenshots, emails, logs, meeting transcripts, bonus block confirmations, everything. Because when the storm breaks, you don't want shelter. You want proof. You think you've seen her final move. You haven't. There's something about fluorescent lights that makes everything feel like a lie. Maybe it's the way they hum above your head, just loud enough to irritate, never loud enough to blame. Maybe it's how they flatten color, strip nuance, make everyone look like a bad version of themselves. Or maybe it's that every betrayal in corporate life seems to happen under those lights. I stood in the break room, watching the coffee drip slow and bitter. 2 floors up, Martin was likely on another call, pretending everything was under control. Brandon, no doubt, was Googling how to run an account he didn't understand. And HR was probably crafting a new euphemism for, we messed up. But me? I was watching, listening, preparing. That morning, something shifted. An email popped up. Subject: updated organizational chart. From internal comms attachment, Q3 underscore restructure underscore draft underscore v2.pdf. I opened it slowly, like peeling a bandage you already know hides a bruise. There it was. Brandon, listed under strategy lead. My name? Gone. Nowhere. Not even in special projects. It was like I'd been erased, like I had never mattered. But here's the thing about ghosts. We see everything, and we don't forget. Nancy from legal called me into a private office that afternoon. She didn't say much, just slid a printout toward me. Someone sent this to us anonymously, she said. It was a Slack exchange between Martin and Brandon. Lines highlighted. Martin: we'll freeze her bonus and push her into operations. She'll quit on her own. No lawsuit. Brandon: smart. Let me know when I can take over Belrose. She'll cave. I didn't react. I simply read it twice, then folded it neatly. They're not very good at cover-ups, I said. Nancy gave a dry laugh. They're arrogant. That's different. For the next 24 hours, I didn't send a single email. I said good morning, held meetings, even helped a junior analyst debug a broken Excel formula. I was the picture of calm professionalism. But my silence was a trap, a velvet-lined one. Because on Friday morning, I walked into HR not as a problem, but as a witness. The meeting was scheduled as a resolution conversation, a final attempt to realign expectations. I wore black slacks, a cream blouse, no jewelry, hair up, face unreadable. Martin sat on one side of the table, HR rep across. Brandon was conveniently out sick. I placed a folder on the table. Inside, refusal of transfer confirmation, blocked payroll screenshot, exit interview calendar, invite, Slack logs, and the organizational chart, annotated in red. I didn't speak first. I let them squirm. Martin opened his mouth, closed it. The HR rep tried to sound firm. This appears to be a misunderstanding of intentions. I tilted my head. Is freeze her bonus so she quits a standard intention? Silence. They asked for time to review. I nodded politely, then stood. Take all the time you need, I said. But know this. I've documented everything, and I'm not afraid of fluorescent lights anymore. I walked out without a glance back. And for the first time in weeks, they didn't follow. They wanted her gone quietly, but she walked out carrying thunder. You never forget the sound of a door you don't slam. It's quieter, more elegant. The kind of door you close with intention, not rage. A door that says, you tried to break me, but I'm leaving intact. And you're not. That's the sound I left behind. But the echo didn't die there. It traveled through hushed conversations, unreadable glances, and silent screens lighting up in boardrooms I wasn't invited to. Not anymore. Monday arrived with rain, and with it, a ripple in the air. I had formally reported the internal communications to compliance. No drama, no theatrics, just documentation and timing. Two things corporate hates when weaponized. Still, they played it cool. Martin called a team-wide check-in, mandatory Zoom, cameras on. He wore his usual too-tight blazer and tried to control the narrative. Words like alignment, transition, and growth opportunity poured out like coffee from a machine that hasn't been cleaned in weeks. But nobody was sipping. I kept my face blank. Others didn't. Even through a screen, you can see when respect evaporates. And that's when I realized this wasn't just my storm anymore. After the meeting, I received an email from someone unexpected. Subject: Hey, from Marie Operations. Marie, who'd never spoken more than hi to me in the hallway. Her message was short. Just wanted to say I saw what they did, and I'm glad you stood your ground. More of us are watching than you think. I stared at that message for a while. Then another came. From Jason in IT, then Ruth in finance, it spread like a quiet fire. The office had been holding its breath. Now it was exhaling. I began preparing my formal statement for the board. Nancy guided me on language, compliance, and tone. It was surgical. Every word sharp enough to cut, none reckless enough to wound the wrong hand. At one point, I asked, "Do you think they'll retaliate again?" Nancy just smirked. They would've, but now they're scared. And she was right, because the bonus suddenly reappeared in my payroll ledger. No apology, no comment, just restored, as if money could erase fingerprints. Meanwhile, Brandon? He stopped trying. No more messages, no more glitches. Word was, the Belrose team had requested to speak directly with whoever used to handle our strategy. She actually understood us. They didn't name me, they didn't need to. Ghosts leave fingerprints too. On Thursday, a closed-door meeting was held on the top floor. I wasn't invited, but I didn't need to be, because an hour later, Martin walked out of that room, his face ashen. No smile, no blazer swagger, just a man who had finally heard footsteps behind him. And they weren't mine. She walked away quietly, but her silence had consequences. There's a certain smell in an office that's trying too hard to seem fine, like someone sprayed air freshener over a fire, burnt plastic under eucalyptus. You walk in and know something scorched recently. That was the vibe on Friday. Except this time, it wasn't coming from me. Brandon showed up late, his shirt untucked, eyes darting like he was searching for the emergency exit in a building that wasn't technically on fire yet. I watched from my desk, pretending to be buried in a spreadsheet while his footsteps paced a little too aimlessly. He passed by the printer, then circled back, opened a drawer, closed it, finally dropped into his chair like it might bite him. The confidence? Gone. The smirk? Missing. And me? I hadn't said a word to him in 5 days. Silence was louder than ever. Mid-morning, a message pinged in my inbox from HR, a single-line update. Thank you for your cooperation during the recent review. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no reference to the missing bonus, the access restrictions, the forced transition, or the Slack messages they swore didn't reflect company values. But it said everything. They weren't fixing things because they were sorry. They were fixing things because they were afraid. I took my time replying, not to HR, of course, but to someone else, Belrose. Specifically, their VP of Strategy, who, after several polite escalations, had requested a direct Zoom with whoever handled their Q2 playbook. That was me. We set the meeting for noon. In that Zoom room, I watched the faces of their senior team light up the grid. Familiar eyes, familiar expectations. People who didn't care about our office politics, they cared about execution. And when I explained calmly and precisely that I would no longer be their point of contact, a silence fell. Then the VP said something that nearly made me grin. Pity. We were hoping to expand with you. We don't work well with transitions. Oh, I bet you don't. When I exited the call, I forwarded the post-meeting summary to Martin, just the bullet points. Client not comfortable with handoff, asking for continuity, considering pause on expansion pending team stability. 10 minutes later, his office door shut. Hard. 15 minutes later, Brandon's screen went dark. 30 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered. A man's voice, crisp, low, controlled. Ms. Rivera, I'm calling on behalf of the board. I believe we're overdue for a conversation. I looked out the window. The clouds had cleared. The air smelled like rain, not smoke. I didn't answer immediately. I wanted him to wait, because they always assume the storm has passed when the sky brightens, but that's just the eye. And I still had questions. When you stop being afraid of leaving, they start being afraid of losing you. The first time I sat in the boardroom, it was to present projections for Q1. I had worn a navy blazer I couldn't afford at the time and memorized every number like a script. Martin had introduced me as a real asset. This time, there was no blazer, no script, no Martin, just me, and a very different kind of performance. The call came precisely at 9 a.m., Monday. A calendar invite titled Strategic Review Confidential. No Zoom link, no attached agenda, just a floor number I hadn't been to in months. I took the elevator in silence. The mirrored walls reflected back a version of myself I hadn't seen in a long time. Focused, yes, but calm. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally did. About the right things. The boardroom smelled like polished wood and cautious diplomacy. 3 board members, 2 legal advisors, 1 empty chair where Martin should have been. The man who had called me, Mr. Halverson, a senior advisor to the board, greeted me with a firm nod. Thank you for coming. We want to better understand the breakdown that occurred in the strategy department and how it impacted our relationship with Belrose. Breakdown. Such a polite word for sabotage. I didn't launch into accusations. I didn't rant. I simply laid out the sequence, the unauthorized role relocation, the forced transfer, the denied access to live accounts, the blocked payroll, the exit interview I never asked for, and the attempt to coerce me into training someone they knew wasn't qualified. Then I presented what they really cared about: numbers, revenue loss potential, retention risk, client dissatisfaction trends, all tied directly to Brandon's early involvement and Martin's decisions. I didn't say, "I told you so," but my numbers did. One of the board members leaned back, arms crossed. "Why didn't you escalate sooner?" I held his gaze. "Because the system is built to punish escalation, until it isn't." That landed harder than I expected. Even the legal advisor looked up. After the meeting, I didn't return to my desk. I didn't need to. The message was sent, the evidence submitted, the silence broken. By the end of the day, 2 things happened. Martin's nameplate vanished from his door. A memo went out from HR, reminding all staff that retaliation for internal objections was strictly prohibited and would result in disciplinary action. Subtle, but seismic. And Brandon? He walked into the break room while I was grabbing tea, eyes lowered. He hovered for a second, then said, "I didn't know it would escalate." I stirred my cup gently. "It didn't escalate, Brandon. It revealed." He didn't reply, just walked out, steam trailing behind him. Some stories don't end with shouting. They end with understanding. And the quiet closing of doors no one dares open again. She didn't burn the building. She rewired the fire alarm. You'd be surprised how quickly people learn your name once they think you're dangerous. Not the kind of dangerous that yells across meetings or slams doors. No, the quiet kind. The kind that knows policy, that keeps records. That says no with a straight face and backs it up with a timestamp. Suddenly, people in departments I never interacted with began greeting me by name. IT procurement. Even that one guy from facilities who never looked up from his clipboard now held the elevator door open with a smile, the same smile Martin used to wear, before it vanished. HR scheduled a follow-up. Not an exit interview, not a realignment chat. This one had a new name: Workplace Restoration Dialogues. Cute. I showed up on time, new HR rep, different tone, less condescension, more caution. Acknowledged communication gaps, unintended oversight, and even floated the phrase, "lessons learned." I nodded politely through most of it, waiting for the part that mattered. And there it was. We'd like to formally invite you to lead the Q4 Transition Strategy Task Force. I nearly laughed, not because it wasn't tempting, not because I couldn't, but because now they wanted to restore what they tried to erase. I gave them the answer they feared most. I'll consider it. Brandon didn't show up for work that week. Rumor was he'd been reassigned, which is office speak for put somewhere he can't break things. No one missed him, not even the clients, especially not Belrose, who sent a formal message that read, "We're pleased to continue working with your team under Ms. Rivera's strategic oversight. Her understanding of our operations has been unparalleled." I printed it, not out of pride, out of principle. Proof in black and white that silence doesn't mean surrender, and refusal doesn't mean defeat. Sometimes it's a declaration. Midweek, I received a message from Marie again, the same quiet woman from operations who had first said, "I saw." This time, she said, "What you did, it made space for the rest of us. Thank you." I stared at that message longer than I expected to, not because I needed validation, but because I hadn't realized how many people had been waiting for someone else to go first. Turns out, quiet revolutions don't start with noise, they start with permission. By Friday, my calendar was full again, but this time it wasn't filled by other people's demands. I had meetings I chose, clients I respected, colleagues I trusted. It didn't feel like returning to normal. It felt like starting something better. Her power didn't come from a title, it came from saying no. The office felt different now. Not louder, not busier, just cleaner. Like someone had opened a window no one knew was painted shut. Fresh air in a place that had been breathing recycled tension for too long. And the strange part? I didn't feel victorious. I felt steady. Not the high of a win, but the stillness of something corrected. Martin's name hadn't been spoken in days. No announcement, no goodbye email, no sad little farewell sheet cake in the break room. Just gone. And the department didn't collapse. No chaos, no mass confusion. Turns out, when the wrong person leaves, everything finally starts working. I had one last meeting that week, a courtesy check-in with the new interim director, Elise. Sharp suit, softer tone. She greeted me not with authority, but with respect. "I've read everything," she said, sliding a folder across the table. "You shouldn't have had to carry that weight alone." I didn't nod. I didn't smile. Because it wasn't a compliment. It was an indictment, but it was also a beginning. She continued, "I know they offered you the Q4 task force, and if you're still considering it, I want to be clear. You'd have full autonomy. No interference. You'd report directly to me." I met her gaze. For the first time in months, someone wasn't asking me to shrink or step aside. They were offering room. Real room. I left the meeting without giving an answer. Not because I didn't know it, but because I deserved to take my time. For so long, every decision I made had been about survival, protecting my name, my work, my worth. But now it was about choice. And I wasn't rushing a single one. That afternoon, I took the long way to the parking garage, passed by the empty corner office where Brandon used to sit, pretending to understand client needs. The light was off. The plaque was gone. In its place, a potted plant someone had forgotten to water. Perfect. Outside, the sky had that silver blue tint right before sunset. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't dread Monday. I didn't rehearse conversations in my head. Didn't brace for impact. Didn't scroll through emails searching for landmines. I just walked. Keys in hand. Bag on my shoulder. No weight in my chest. That was the win. Not the meeting. Not the offer. Not even the vindication. But the peace, because when they asked, "Will you train Brandon?" and I said, "No, I'm leaving." I didn't realize then what I was walking away from. Now I do. I wasn't leaving the company. I was leaving the version of me that tolerated what I no longer had to. She left the room. Not her power. There was no parade, no standing ovation, no dramatic slow clap in the break room. But on my last day in that office, someone had left a single post-it note on my keyboard. No name. Just 2 words, handwritten, "We noticed." That was enough. I walked through the halls like someone flipping through the last pages of a novel she no longer needed to reread. The fake laughter near the snack bar. The quiet, padded silences of guilt in HR. The blinking lights of forgotten inboxes. It all faded behind me, frame by frame, like a story I once survived. And as I passed by that conference room, the same glass box where Martin asked if I'd train Brandon, I caught my reflection. Not tired, not angry, just awake. I didn't leave because I lost. I left because I chose to. Not out of fear, out of clarity. Because when someone tries to make you smaller and you stay, you start to believe them. But when you stand, when you say no, you stretch, you remember, you return to your full size, and people notice. Belrose sent a farewell gift, a signed card, a small engraved pen. Thank you for making us feel like more than numbers. I held it for a moment, then packed it with care. No awards, just reminders of impact, of value, of what happens when you show up as yourself, even when the room hopes you won't. I didn't accept the Q4 offer. I didn't stay for the transition team. I didn't hang on to a seat at a table that once tried to uninvite me. I started something new, something mine. And the irony? The very refusal they feared, the no that made them nervous, that was the beginning of every yes I truly wanted. People still ask me if I'd do it again. Say no, walk away, risk the fallout. And I always answer the same way. Absolutely, just sooner. Because the moment I stopped defending my worth was the moment they had to face it. Sometimes your quietest moment is the loudest legacy you leave.